As we usher in hour two of America's Forum, we go now live to a press conference dealing with the shootings early this morning, the shooting of two police in Ferguson, Missouri. Let's join that press conference right now.
15 police officers on the scene. At 9 o'clock, Ferguson makes one arrest of a protester in the roadway on the charges of failure to comply, being in the roadway, endangering the welfare of a child, and resisting or interfering with arrest. Protesters leave the roadway. At 10 o'clock, due to the amount of people that are in the roadway, another Code 1000, an additional 25 officers come in. Eventually we end up with 69 police officers that respond. At 10:30, Ferguson makes an additional arrest of a protester in the roadway, and at 11:15 they make a final arrest. Now at this point, we are beginning to see the crowd begin to diminish. And in fact, by about a quarter till midnight, we're beginning to see not only the crowd beginning to leave, but we're also seeing the police officers that are going to be leaving. At least some of them. I would imagine we had 75 protesters, probably 40 police officers left at this time. So we're thinking that it's thinning out. At 12 a.m., we hear three or four shots ring out. Some of you have seen that on the media. These are shots that aren't in the air, they're not in the ground. One way you can tell is when you listen to the audio, you can actually hear those shots singing. Those shots immediately strike two officers that are standing next to each other. But I'd like to underscore that these officers are also standing in a line of about at least 20 to 25 officers. So we have a group of officers standing there. It's very evident that we have a group of officers standing there. And the Webster Groves officer is shot right here at the high point of your cheek, right under the right eye, and the bullet lodges right behind his ear. And that bullet is still with him. He's going to have further evaluation to figure out what they're going to do with that round. The St. Louis County officer was struck right here on the shoulder, and the bullet came out the middle of his right back, between his scapula and his spine. Now, fortunately, with both officers, we don't have any remarkable long-term injuries. In other words, it wasn't in somebody's brain or heart or anything like this. But you need to know these two officers took a very hard hit. I mean, anytime that you're shot in the face and have a bullet lodged in your head, anytime that you have a through and through wound where the bullet enters your shoulder and comes out the middle of your right back, those are hard hits. So we're lucky, by God's grace, we didn't lose two officers last night. So one of the things that I've talked about is that we do need to understand as a community, and we certainly understand it as a police department and as law enforcement, that we have an obligation to make sure that folks that want to express their First Amendment rights have the ability to do that. But when you look at the tenor of at least some of the people that are involved in the protest or civil unrest, it at times can be very troubling. And it's difficult for the officers to discern within a crowd of folks that are perhaps there for the right reason exactly who's doing what. And one of the problems we have is, similar to last night, I would have to imagine that these protesters were among the shooters that shot at the police officers. And for the police officers that are standing there and really don't have the ability at nighttime to understand what they're looking at, it's dark, there's a whole lot of people out there, there's a lot of noise, it's very difficult for the officers to really understand what they're looking at the time and really to be able to evaluate any type of threats. So, you know, I would just tell you that you need to understand that. I think it's a miracle that we haven't had any instances similar to this over the summer and fall. With the amount of gunfire that we would hear, that I personally heard last summer and fall, I think it's a miracle we haven't had something like this happen. And I think we're very fortunate that that has happened. I'd also like to point out that my officers tell me that when this happened, when they heard the shots and when they heard the bullets singing past, that they saw muzzle flashes. But these muzzle flashes were probably about 125 yards away. Many officers drew their weapons, but no officers fired. But what if we're in a situation to where it's 25 or 50 yards away? And it's a threat right there in front of you that can be engaged, except we're around a situation to where perhaps 40, 50, 60, 70 people are around. I mean, we really need to understand the dangers of this. And I'm not blaming anybody other than the individuals that took a shot at my officers and hit them. But I am telling you that these are situations that it's very difficult for us to navigate through if you're a police officer on the street and you're doing everything you can to protect people's First Amendment rights, everything you can to protect other people's rights that may be traveling through the area, anything that you can be doing to protect life and property. This is another layer that makes it very difficult for our police officers out there to deal with. And I hope people understand that, because it's a very tricky line for us to be able to walk. Ladies and gentlemen, we were very close to having happened what happened in NYPD with Officer Ramus and Officer Liu. We could have buried 2 police officers next week over this. And I didn't really expect the amount of agitation at times that we saw last night out of the crowd based on the news that happened yesterday. And not everybody there expressed agitation, but we certainly are always cautious. But I didn't expect, obviously, either that we would have 2 police officers shot last night. One of the officers from St. Louis County is a 41-year-old. He's a 14-year veteran of law enforcement. The Webster Groves officer is 32 years old, and he's a 5-year veteran of law enforcement. So I'll answer any questions that you have.
Chief, any update about the suspects who did this, who you are potentially looking for?
Yeah, you know, we have some perhaps leads on that. I'm going to leave that alone at the time, let the detectives work. They're still out in the field right now. In fact, the lieutenant, the sergeant, and his staff have still not had time to come into Clayton and even brief me. So we have talked to him on the phone. As you might imagine, this is the #1 priority right now of the St. Louis County Police Department, to identify these individuals. That individual are individuals who shot our police officers.
But no one is in custody?
No, ma'am.
If the shot was 125 yards away, what degree of confidence can you have that there was even associated with the protest, rather than just taking the protest as an opportunity to try to shoot a cop?
Yeah, I talked to my staff about that in detail, because I had the same question about why this is. There are indications that would lead us to believe that obviously some of the folks that were there to participate last night, you know, and expressing their opinions, they were spread over a wider area than just confined, and that did extend not only to the north and the south, but also to the west. So I feel very confident that whoever did this was there for the wrong reason, not the right reason, and came there for whatever nefarious reason it was. But I do feel like there was an unfortunate association with that gathering.
Chief, you mentioned kind of this almost impossible task where you have officers standing on a line, almost like sitting ducks, and then you have folks who are protesting some legitimately and others who may be rabble-rousing. Have you all thought yet about how you're going to go about this differently going forward? I mean, is there anything at all you can do differently? And also, can you speak to the concern from law enforcement's part that you don't want any of your officers to be too aggressive now or too quick to react now because of what happened?
Yeah, I would actually back up to the last part of that question. I sent a text last night out to two of my senior staff members, 2 of my lieutenant colonels, that said, listen, our bearing this evening is going to be very measured. So we want to make sure we don't cross that line and do anything that we shouldn't be doing as law enforcement, and we protect those people's rights. How is it going to look differently? We have some experience in this. The county police department does, in running some of the operations last fall and during the grand jury verdict and before, and different things like that. So we're going to be exploring having to perhaps readopt those plans that we have. So one of the things with the Code 1000 plan that caused this...
That is John Belmar. He is the St. Louis County Chief of Police. The press conference in Clayton, Missouri, at the headquarters of the St. Louis County Police Department. It is worth noting that Chief Belmar is talking about the shooting of 2 policemen, neither of whom was on the Ferguson police force officially, although the incident took place in Ferguson. One, a 32-year-old officer from Webster Grove, Missouri. The other, an officer with Chief Belmar's St. Louis County force.
41 years old, shot in the shoulder. The bullet came out his back. We heard about the other man getting shot in the face, and that bullet is still lodged.
As the chief said, just under his right eye, and
in the back of his ear.
Bullet lodged there, and they have to determine what they are going to do medically. The doctors will determine, but Chief Belmar saying that Missouri is very fortunate, St. Louis County very fortunate that they're not burying 2 police officers because it was a very close call.
Even referencing what happened in New York when we saw those 2 police officers that were targeted innocently, did nothing.
And it is worth noting, as we were listening to those comments, I just wondered the tenor of the final question to the police chief. Is there a fear the police will overreact now? And the chief was very measured, talking about First Amendment rights. For the life of me, as a former public official,
right,
and as one viewing this situation, I don't know why on earth Governor Jay Nixon does not declare a curfew tonight in Ferguson, Missouri.
Well, he might do that.
We heard Chief Belmar intimate that they would review measures. He did not use the word curfew. But when you hear this talk about a measured response from the police when 2 officers were shot last night, when you had what has been admitted by the Attorney General of the United States, a false narrative that was perpetrated in the wake of the incident and sadly the death of Michael Brown, who apparently was involved in a burglary, the false narrative of hands up, don't shoot. The Attorney General was forced to admit that last week, and then earlier this week, the Attorney General of the United States goes on the record saying the Ferguson Police Department should be disbanded. How does that aid in racial harmony? How does that aid in not making the police a target? That's a serious question that perhaps the Washington Press Corps will never address with this Attorney General, and certainly not with the President of the United States, but it is a legitimate question that Americans ought to be asking today.
But I hear what you're saying, and I think our viewers hear what you're saying. I think there are 2 different issues here. We're talking about Michael Brown and Darren Wilson. Darren Wilson was found innocent of all charges. He was not racially motivated to kill this man. However, we cannot ignore the fact that this department, it was shown, has a history of targeting African Americans. That's what the investigation uncovered. And a lot of people believe that this was the Michael Brown being shot, that this was just kind of like the trigger. This was kind of like the cherry on the sundae that just sparked everything.
And it is worth noting that when you talk about one of the problems with the police force was an emphasis on revenue in writing tickets and making arrests and levying fines to pay for the community, which in and of itself is a problem. The situation that I just feel you cannot separate is the federal government lending aid to what it now admits is a false narrative, saying the police force should be disbanded. And you have a situation last night where you have the return, the protests have continued, and Chief Belmar himself said it was a miracle that an incident like this did not happen earlier. But I'm just wondering, again, in the wake of this incident, First Amendment rights, everyone is entitled to them, but with rights come responsibilities. Last night, someone decided to essentially suspend First Amendment rights with shooting a firearm and wounding 2 police officers.
And we will, of course, continue to follow this story and bring you the very latest developments right here on Newsmax TV, as well as our website, newsmax.com.
Obviously, this continues to be a subject we will talk about, and we monitor that press conference. If there are other newsworthy remarks from Chief John Belmar, we will bring them to you, and we wait to see what happens out of Jefferson City or some other organization, perhaps to call for some action to, in fact, enforce calm on the streets of Ferguson, Missouri.